Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to a series of videos in which I am reading you a book. We are reading not just any book, but the good book. We are reading the Bible, specifically the New Testament in the King James translation, and specifically the Gospel according to St. Matthew. And we are up to chapter 5. Early on in the Gospel, we've already got through Mark, and in Mark we met our main character. We met a Judean wonder worker and preacher named Jesus, who sets about healing people in the countryside, casting out demons. Some very dramatic scenes in Mark. One demon-possessed man who lived out in the tombs and scared everybody, crying night and day. And because his wonder-working and his miracle-working, his cures are successful, Jesus quickly draws a huge crowd wherever he goes. Crowds so bad that we are told in Mark over and over again that they couldn't even sit down to eat. A very homely detail. Mark, it turns out, when you have something to compare him to, is a very homely gospel. We are in very different territory with the gospel according to St. Matthew. Even in these early days, we can see that Matthew is more, well, the word we might use is literary. We can see that right away, that he is telling a bigger story. But there are common elements. And those have started to kick off. His Jesus, now that he's, up and about as an adult, is drawing crowds of people. And he is healing people. We haven't got any details yet on the healing. Mark went into quite a bit of detail on a lot of the healings. We haven't got any of that yet, but the refrain has kicked up again. This Jesus is not going to be different in that way from Mark's Jesus. He is a wonder worker and a healer, and he is drawing huge crowds while he preaches. Now, the criticism that I had of Mark, keep in mind, you already know this. If there's one thing I know about this read aloud so far, it's that we're all on the same page in terms of how we're approaching it. Could not be happier about that. The fire-breathing atheists who hate any mention of religion do not see. They seem to have dropped quickly out of this. They know that's not what this is. The fire-breathing atheists who are also really picky little so-and-sos have also dropped out. Once they realize that although I might point out weird stuff and inconsistency in the text, I'm not harping on it. And also, on the other end of the spectrum, the fire and brimstone fundamentalists who view this stuff as unimpeachable, uncriticizable, supernaturally inspired literature, they have also dropped out. This is also not that. This is, as I've said many times, it's not Sunday school. So I'm not preaching this text. Instead, we're kind of doing a weird thing, but I think it's a thing that will really make these texts your own. And they should be. Consider how important they are, how absolutely all-pervasive they are. They should be. You should know them. And that is, read them as text. We're reading them as stories, so that we will remember the characters and talk about some of the things that go on in them. Been absolutely wonderful, but in my criticism of Mark, one criticism that came up over and over again, until we were caught up in the massive drama of the human story that takes place, once Jesus puts himself on a collision course with the powers that be in Jerusalem, and after that, a human story takes over of a doomed preacher who is going to be arrested, who is getting more and more intemperate in his public utterances and guaranteeing a death sentence, and then gets a death sentence. Before that point, before the story gets to that point, my main complaint with Mark was that although we hear that Jesus is constantly going into the synagogue and going into squares and preaching, we don't get a lot of the preaching. We don't learn what it is he's actually saying. Maybe that's a sotto voce comment on the part of whoever wrote the Gospel according to Mark, that it didn't really matter. That if you set out a shingle as someone who can heal people and bring people back from the dead, they're not going to care what you're saying. But that's kind of cynical. You'd like to think that those crowds were going in order to hear him. Where Mark tells us that the wonder of Jesus talking was that he spoke, quote unquote, with authority. He didn't seem like just a normal person reciting scripture in front of the crowd at the synagogue. It felt different than that. Well, for a brief minute there in one chapter of Matthew, it looked like that was going to stay the same, but no. No, we are up to chapter 5, and chapter 5 finally is preaching. Chapter 5 is what Jesus is, at least a part of what Jesus wants to tell the world. So let's see what that is. Let's start. Uh, and seeing the multitudes, he went up into a mountain. And when he was set, his disciples came unto him, and he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, Are they alone? We're finally going to get him some teaching. Is he away from everybody? Seems like the disciples go and find him, but there's no one else. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God. Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are ye, when men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For so persecuted they the prophets which were before you. Ye are the salt of the earth. But if the salt hath lost its savour, wherewith shall it be salted? It is thenceforth good for nothing, but to be cast out and to be trodden under foot of men. Ye are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hid. Neither do men light a candle and put it under a bushel, but on a candlestick, and giveth light unto all that are in the house. Let your light shine so before men, that they may see your good works, and glorify your Father which is in heaven. Think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or tittle shall in no wise pass from the law, till all be fulfilled. Whosoever therefore shall break one of these least commandments shall teach men so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whosoever shall do and teach them, the same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I say unto you, that except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees, ye shall in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven. Ye have heard that it is said by them of old time, Thou shalt not kill, and whosoever shall kill shall be in danger of the judgment. But I say unto you, that whosoever is angry with his brother without cause, shall be in danger of the judgment. Whosoever shall say to his brother, Raka, that is, you moron, shall be in danger of counsel. But whosoever shall say, Thou fool, shall be in danger of hellfire. Therefore, if thou bring thy gift to the altar, and there rememberest that thy brother hath aught against thee, leave thy gift before the altar, and go thy way. First be reconciled to thy brother, then come and offer thy gift. Agree with thine adversary quickly, whilst thou art in the way with him, lest at any time the adversary deliver thee to the judge, and the judge deliver thee to the officer, and thou be cast in prison. Verily I say unto you, thou shalt be by no means come out hence, till thou hast paid the uttermost farthing. Ye have heard it said by them of old time, Thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say unto you, that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. And if thy right eye offend thee, pluck it out, and cast it from thee. For it is profitable for thee that one of thy members shall perish, not that thy whole body should be cast into hell. And if thy right hand offend thee, cut it off, and cast it from thee. For it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not thy whole body should be cast into hell. It hath been said, Whosoever shall put away his wife, let him give her a writing of divorcement. But I say unto you, that whosoever shall put away his wife, saving for the cause of fornication, causeth her to commit adultery. And whosoever shall marry her that is divorced, committeth adultery. Again, ye have heard that it hath been said by them of old time, Thou shalt not forswear thyself, but shalt perform unto the Lord thine oaths. But I say unto you, swear not at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by earth, for it is his footstool. Neither by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king, neither shalt thou swear by thy head, because thou canst not make one hair white or black. But let your communication be yea, yea, nay, nay. For whatsoever is more than these cometh of evil. Ye shall have heard that it hath been said, An eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. But I say unto you, that ye resist not evil, but whosoever shall smite thee on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if any man shall sue thee at the law, and take away thy coat, let him have thy cloak as also. And whosoever shall compel thee to go a mile, go with him twain. Go to him that asketh for thee, and from him that would borrow of thee turn thou not away. Ye have heard that it hath been said, Thou shalt love thy neighbor, and hate thine enemy. But I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which use you despitefully, and persecute you, that ye may be children of your Father which is in heaven. For he maketh his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, sendeth rain on the just and the unjust. For if ye love them which love you, what reward have ye? Do not even the publicans do the same? And if ye salute your brethren only, what do ye more than others? Do not even the publicans so? Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. All right, so a bit longer of a chapter, but we certainly have what we've been looking for in terms of preaching. There is at least the beginning of what we could call Jesus' method. And what do we have there? I mean, that the whole of the chapter is preaching. There's nothing else, except for the detail at the very beginning, which is that it appears that this is delivered only to the disciples. Jesus goes up a mountain, and once he's settled where he wants to be, away from the crowds, that's the whole point why he goes up there in the first place, the disciples go and join him. So maybe this is not done, or typically when you see this painted, delivering Jesus preaching like this, it's out in a field or it's in a large crowd. I don't read that way, this passage at all. It seems to me like the whole point of it seems to me the whole point of this is that it's done in private, that it's done to the disciples that he called in the last chapter. Those disciples that, just as in Mark, instantly leave their world. And not just their world, but the people who depend on them. The sons of Zebedee leave him in the boat. They're fixing their nets. Zebedee is probably an older man. He needs them. He can't afford to hire workers, probably, but off they go. One way or another, though, no matter who it's delivered to, this is a message. This is a preaching. We finally get to hear it. Something a little more than repent of your sins. And it's serious. We could talk for the rest of the year on just this one chapter and what it means. Jesus says that he is here not to overturn the law, and yet he immediately proceeds to overturn the law, because Mosaic law doesn't just say you can't remove any of these things. It also says you can't add to any of these things. This is perfect. This law was given to us by God. You can't add things to it any more than you could take them away, and Jesus proceeds to add things to the law. Left, right, and center add things to the law, some of which is weird. Again, looking at this just as a book, if we look at this just as a text, this is a character who comes out of nowhere, is baptized in the River Jordan by John the Baptist, and has God himself say, in a voice from heaven, "This is my Son, in whom I am well pleased." Okay, so Jesus has already been ministered to by angels and tempted by devils, so he is not fully human. He's alien. Given that, and given that he is, we can only presume, a votary of some kind, of an even larger God, why would he care about divorce? Why would any supernatural being care about divorce? Why would he be mucking around in the specifics about bills of divorce? Why would any non-human deity care about such things? Such things have no moral component at all. Why would they be part of a preacher? Again, that's an element that seems to me to be very, very human. Not something that would, in this kind of a story, not something that would realistically happen, and yet it always does. It always does. In Egyptian mythology, in Greek mythology, in Roman mythology, the half-human demigods who should not think like humans do. Invariably, they do. There's that. There's Jesus talking about things like that, but there's also Jesus laying out a worldview, certainly a sin worldview that goes well beyond what any of his original listeners would have been familiar with. Not killing someone, sure, but not being angry with someone? Not committing adultery, sure, but not even feeling lust in your heart? it's it seems like a bit much to ask human beings who are hardwired to lust that they not even feel that. That seems like a bit much to ask. It seems to go a bit far. And some of those passages are strange, no matter how often you read them. What is the point of issuing some sort of theocratic ban on something that humans literally cannot help doing? It's like getting in front of a crowd in Judea and preaching against being victim to gravity. Why would you do that? It is absolutely natural for you to lust after a woman in your heart. Absolutely natural. It's not a product of sin, and it's not a product of inculcating sin over many years. It's natural. The minute you hit puberty, you start doing that. And obviously, we have to draw a real functional line. The line that Jesus here is intentionally eliminating. We obviously have to draw a real hard functional line between what you think, in other words, what your natural tendencies are, and what you do about it. That is the wisdom, in large part, the wisdom of Mosaic law. And here, it's gone. Here, it doesn't matter. It matters what you do, but it matters also what you think. But as weird and strange as some of those things are, and of course I had major problems when Mark went on that bit about how if I offend thee, pluck it out. Seriously unrealistic, but also seriously violently unhealthy advice. Because what is that saying? That's saying no growth, no grappling, no compromise. If something bothers you, kill it. If something in you bothers you, then be ruthless about it. Don't try to understand it. Don't try to accommodate it. Don't try to work around it. Don't try to improve yourself with it. No, just cut it off. I had problems when Mark said that. I had problems again when Matthew said that. But here, in this teaching, apart from all that, we get something new. Not only for the Gospels, but for the world. We get something new. Something utterly arresting. There is an absolutely age-old cycle in living things, in all multicellular living things, but certainly in all species of humans, and especially our own species. There is a cycle of bloody-minded retribution. You remember your slights. You remember your grudges. You remember your insults. In this chapter, Jesus starts off by saying, well, if you have quarreled with your brother, mending that quarrel takes precedent even over worshiping at temple. Go and fix that problem. Go and fix that problem right away. Don't leave it. And again, he's probably speaking metaphorical. Certainly there's a heavy metaphorical gloss, a preaching gloss on that line about mend your dispute with a friend of yours or with a fellow. Mend it in the road. Mend it before you get to the courthouse, because then you could end up in jail. That has been read metaphorically ever since. Okay, we can read it metaphorically. That's one thing. Those strictures are one thing. Because although they are more than what the old law that Jesus' audience would have been familiar with call for, they do still acknowledge that cycle. That just inborn DNA basic cycle. That wrongs require righting, that hurts require hurting, that injuries done to you require at the very least brooding, and that people become your enemies when they do you harm. And that locks in place a whole schema of behavior. Once someone is locked in place in your mind, in your conceptual view of the world as an enemy, then a whole range of activity is locked in place, and that's that. That cycle is so basic that it's on cave paintings. It underlies every piece of literature that has come before this moment. Until now. When a figure who is out in public, healing, and has been given the imprimatur of God himself, says, break that cycle. Break that cycle. You must end that cycle. You must not wait for a Messiah to do it. You must not wait for a king to do it. You personally must break that cycle. If someone is your enemy, if they hurt you, ask them what you can do for them. Forgive them, and give to them. We are so familiar with the mantras of Christianity that we lose sight, I think, sometimes of how incredibly revolutionary that is. If telling your listeners that you must not even lust after a woman in your heart is unrealistic, well, this is certainly unrealistic, inhuman. This does feel like something that someone who was not fully human would say to a human audience. This cycle is the root of all your problems. It's the root of all problems. This cycle is. What you need to do is break that cycle. No more vengeance, no more payback, no more nothing like that. No more even resentment. When someone speaks ill of you, when they strike you, when they steal from you, give to them. Love them. It's always touching to me when I read this passage, and we're going to get to this passage a couple of other times in this read-along, how different the world would be if everyone did this. Of course, that's the huge weakness of Jesus telling these people basically to break the cycle of your own vengeful, bloody-minded human nature, is that everybody's got to do it. If even one human doesn't, if even one human says, well, the rest of you can go on forgiving people and kissing your enemies, but I'm not going to, then it doesn't work. So yeah, go and make disciples of all nations, indeed. Of course, I do have my quibbles. When Jesus says that God causes the rain to fall on the just and the unjust alike, it almost seems like he's implying that when he adjures you to be perfect, as your Father which is in heaven is perfect, it almost seems like he's implying that God is indifferent to whether or not someone is his friend or his enemy. When, I know we haven't done a read aloud of the Old Testament. Allow me to give you a little spoiler if you're not familiar with it. He isn't indifferent at all. Not at all. This commandment, God fails before you're even a third of the way through the book of Genesis. And he goes right on, bloodily failing it all the way to the end of the Old Testament. He's steeped to his hip bones in blood by the time Genesis itself is over. He keeps tabs, he holds grudges, he kills people even when they aren't his enemies. So when I say this is new, it's new even for the God family, because the Son has a different idea than the Father. So we've waited a long time to get preaching of Jesus, and we got quite a bit of it. We're not done. We're going to move on to the next chapter next time, but this is astonishing. Imagine if you took this seriously. Now, I know there are a lot of Christians that are listening to me, and I have to say, I hope I'm not being too starry-eyed here. People in my life that I have ever met who have come close to being this way were all Christians. But most Christians, even good Christians, even the ones who feel their faith, do not do this. They do not live by this. They have enemies, and they don't love them. Maybe somebody listening, maybe some of you listening now, I know there are Christians who are listening to this whole series. Maybe some of you are that way. You think, I am a sinner, I could do better, I could improve, but my faith means a lot to me, and I try really hard. I wonder. It's been my experience that most of the Christians that I've known try really hard to live by the gospel, except for the parts that are impossible. Of those, they don't try at all. Do you have enemies? Have you forgiven them? Do you love them? Even when it makes you vulnerable? Because that's, of course, the key, is that it isn't just something you do in your heart. It's that it makes you vulnerable to them. Notice Jesus is not telling you, love your enemy. He's saying, give them your cloak. So I think it's fascinating, utterly fascinating. There is nothing like this. When you strip it bare of all of the theology that has followed, or any of the allegorical readings of other contemporary ancient gospels, there is nothing like this. So we'll see if it continues. We'll move on to the next chapter, but I certainly got what I was waiting for, didn't I? So we'll see. The one thing, now that we have the preaching, and now that we have the crowds, there are two things that we're missing that we got in bucket loads in Mark. One is dumb disciples, the classic trademark dumb disciples, where he gathers them to him and they walk all around, but they never understand anything. They never get anything. Everything he does surprises them. They don't believe him in anything until they see it. Even then, they don't believe it. That's one thing. And the other thing is detailed miracle working. Mark gave us a lot of detailed miracle working. And Matthew has yet to do that. We'll see if he does. So we'll move on to the next chapter, and I'll see you then. Thank you, BookTube.